All right, let's kick off another deep dive. Today we're tackling a thinker who's had a massive impact, but who can be, well, a bit of a brain twister.
Yeah, he's not exactly light reading, is he?
Definitely not beach reading.
Yeah.
We're talking about Emmanuel Levinas. We've got a really interesting excerpt from this book, Levinas, The Ethics of the Other, to guide us, along with some background on the man himself. So, what's the mission for today's deep dive?
Basically, to get our heads around Levinas' pretty revolutionary ideas.
Revolutionary how?
Well, he really turns things upside down when it comes to traditional Western philosophy.
Go on.
See, instead of starting with those classic questions about existence, about being, the whole what's the meaning of life thing,
Yeah.
Levinas insists we got to start somewhere totally different. With ethics, with our responsibility to something he calls the other.
Okay, so right away we've got this big idea, the other. Now, on one level, it seems kind of obvious, right? Like, yeah, of course other people exist, but Levinas is digging way deeper than that, right?
Absolutely. He uses this really fascinating analogy to make his point from Robinson Crusoe. You remember that story?
Cast away on a deserted island.
That's the one. Crusoe's completely alone. His whole world is just about surviving, mastering his environment. He's like in this bubble, completely self-contained.
Until that famous footprint shows up on the beach.
Exactly. That one footprint changes everything. Suddenly there's evidence of someone totally outside of his experience. The other. And this encounter, it forces Crusoe to make a choice.
Dominate or respect.
Exactly. Now, how do you think Crusoe responds?
He tries to, I don't know, civilize Friday, right? Teaches him English, introduces him to Christianity.
Does. And for Levinas, that highlights a really dangerous pattern he sees in Western thought.
Which is?
This tendency to reduce the other to the same, to force everyone and everything into our own little categories, our way of understanding the world.
Hold on, though. Isn't that how we, learn things? I mean, if I see a new kind of bird, I try to figure out, what family it belongs to, what its characteristics are. Is Levinas saying we shouldn't do that?
He's not saying categorizing is always bad, but he warns us that it can get ethically tricky when we're talking about people. Because when we reduce the other to the same, we risk ignoring their individuality, their own unique dignity. We're not really encountering them at all.
Okay, so he's arguing that Western philosophy has been so focused on understanding being that it's kind of missed the boat when it comes to how we treat each other.
Exactly. He even mentions Socrates, who, thought the good was beyond essence. But Levinas takes it a step further, way further.
How so?
He says ethics shouldn't just be part of philosophy. It should be the starting point, the foundation. He calls it first philosophy.
Whoa, okay. So instead of asking, what's the meaning of life, Levinas is saying we should first ask, how should I treat other people?
Yes. He wants to ground our thinking in that lived experience of ethical responsibility, the encounter with the other, before we even get to those big existential questions.
All right. I'm already rethinking my to-do list. Okay, so we've got the other, this fundamental building block for Levinas, but then he throws in this really abstract concept called ill-why.
Right.
And I gotta admit, this is where I start to get a little lost.
It's definitely a tough one. Ill-why literally just means there is. But Levinas uses it to describe ish. It's this kind of pre-conscious state of being before thoughts or, even our sense of self kicks in.
So like that feeling you get when you can't sleep, and it's not that you're thinking about anything specific, it's just this heavy awareness of, I don't know, just existing.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. It's this formless, undifferentiated ground of being. And Levinas argues that experiencing the other, it shakes us up in a similar way.
Because it disrupts our comfortable little world, throws us off balance.
Exactly. The other doesn't fit into our neat little categories, confronts us with something we can't fully grasp. And that brings us to another of Levinas's big ideas. The face.
Not just like someone's physical appearance, though, right?
Right. It's way deeper than that.
What is it then?
It's like the expression of the other that breaks through our self-centeredness. It's a call to responsibility, and it goes beyond logic or reasons.
Okay, break that down for me. What does that call to responsibility actually look like? How should we understand that?
Imagine you're just going about your day, lost in your thoughts. Then you encounter another person. Their face, just their very being disrupts your little bubble. It makes you aware of them, their vulnerability, their needs, their absolute difference from you. It's kind of like being jolted awake from that Ildiko fog we talked about.
And that encounter, that disruption, that's what's inherently ethical for Levinas.
Exactly. The face places this demand on us, an ethical demand to respond, to be responsible for the other. even before we fully understand them. And this is where Levinas starts to really challenge our usual ideas about morality.
It's like all our usual ideas about ethics, like following the rules, weighing consequences, that all comes after this raw encounter with the other.
Exactly. And it forces us to face some pretty uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Like, Levinas argues that we have this tendency towards egoism, wanting
Yes.
to control and dominate, just like Robinson Crusoe, imposing his will on everything.
But that's not like just a castaway thing, right? It's something we all struggle with.
Totally. Levinas sees this impulse everywhere in human nature and in Western thought. We're constantly trying to stuff the world into these neat little boxes, make it fit our own desires.
But isn't that just, I don't know, part of being human? We want to learn, we want to understand the world.
Sure, the pursuit of knowledge is important, absolutely. But Levinas argues that it can't come at the expense of ethics. In fact, he suggests that real knowledge, true understanding, it only comes through an ethical relationship with the other.
So it's not about knowledge as like a tool for mastery. It's more about knowledge as a way to deepen our ethical responsibility.
Exactly. It's about understanding the other on their own terms, not trying to force them into our preconceived categories.
Yeah.
Think about it. If you approach someone with the mindset of, I need to figure you out, categorize you, you're already shutting yourself off to who they really are.
Wow. Okay. So Levinas really is turning traditional philosophy on its head. It's like he's saying, hold on, before you go off trying to understand the universe, maybe first figure out how to treat people with a little respect.
Exactly. He's not giving us a rigid system of ethics, a set of rules. It's more like he's calling for a shift in our whole being.
This is intense, but I kind of love it. It's like we can be so much more than just self-interested individuals. We can be these, I don't know, ethically responsible beings connected to each other through this encounter with the face.
And Levinas takes this idea even further with this concept of substitution. He actually says we are, in a way, responsible for the other, to the point of substituting ourselves for them.
Hold up, substituting ourselves. Okay, even for Levinas, that sounds pretty out there. Does he mean like literally taking on other people's suffering?
It is a tough one to wrap your head around. He's not saying we have to become martyrs or anything. It's more about, a radical empathy, a willingness to put the needs of the other before our own.
So more about that fundamental shift in perspective we were talking about.
Exactly. Recognizing that we aren't isolated individuals, we're connected to each other. And that connection, for Levinas, it's inherently ethical.
This really makes you think about your own life, Is Levinas is right? How does this change how we interact with people, how we move through the world?
That is the big question.
Yeah.
And it's one we each have to figure out for ourselves. But remember what we were saying about saying over said.
Going beyond all those fixed categories and concepts, trying to get at something deeper.
Yes. So if we really want to live ethically, maybe we need to move beyond just ideas and engage with the other in a real concrete way.
So less theorizing, more doing. More, responding to people's needs.
You got it. It's about being present to the face of the other.
Mm.
Being present to their needs and responding with empathy, responsibility. Maybe it's something as simple as listening, offering support, or even just acknowledging they exist.
And acknowledging the limits of our own understanding, right? We can never fully grasp the experience of the other, but we can at least try to be open to their difference, their otherness.
Exactly. That openness, that humility, I think that's essential.
Mm.
Recognizing that we don't have all the answers, that we're always learning from the other.
This is so different from how we usually think about ethics. It's not about rules. It's not about being perfect. It's about showing up and, responding to the needs of others the best way we can.
You got it. It's so much more dynamic than the way we typically think about morality.
Okay, I can see how this would be really tough, but also kind of liberating in a way, right? Like it takes the pressure off having to be morally perfect and just lets us focus on, on being real with each other.
Yeah. There's a freedom in recognizing our own limitations, but still trying to live ethically. It's about the effort more than achieving some kind of perfect state.
But we got to acknowledge the critiques too, right? Some people would say this is all too much, too demanding. It could even lead to, a kind of ethical paralysis where we're so worried about doing the right thing that we end up doing nothing.
That's fair. And it's something Levinas himself was aware of. He knew ethical responsibility isn't about achieving some kind of perfect state. It's a process, a constant striving, right?
Right. So not about being perfect, about being present, about showing up for people in a real way, even if it's not always some grand gesture.
Exactly. And sometimes those small acts of kindness, they can be more powerful than we realize.
Another criticism is that Levinas's ideas are too abstract, too disconnected from real-world issues. Like, he didn't seem that involved in politics or social justice movements himself.
It's true he focused more on the philosophical foundations, but his goal was really to wake us up to the ethical dimension of being human.
You mean that deep-down impulse to respond to the face of the other?
Exactly. And that impulse, even if it's abstract when you talk about it philosophically, it has huge implications for how we live in the world.
So even if Levinas doesn't offer concrete political solutions, his work gives us a framework for thinking about those issues, right?
Exactly. Like, he's laying the groundwork for a more just and compassionate world, even if he doesn't tell us exactly how to get there.
And that brings us to, I guess, another critique, that Levinas's perspective might be, I don't know, kind of Eurocentric, maybe even a bit colonial.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Because his emphasis on the face maybe ignores the experiences of people who've been marginalized, dehumanized, people whose faces haven't been seen or respected.
It's a complex issue, for sure, and scholars have gone back and forth about it. It's true, Levinas's work is rooted in European philosophy.
Yeah.
And his own life was mostly shaped by that European context.
So even though his ethics aim to be universal, they might reflect a particular cultural perspective.
That's one way to look at it. But remember, Levinas was a Jewish philosopher who lived through the horrors of the Holocaust.
So he saw firsthand the consequences of dehumanization.
Exactly. That experience definitely shaped his thinking about ethical responsibility.
So there are definitely valid critiques of Levinas from a post-colonial perspective, but his message of ethical responsibility is still relevant, right? It challenges us to think about how we might be contributing to systems of oppression, even unintentionally.
Absolutely. Levinas' ethics, while not explicitly anti-colonial, provide a way to recognize and resist those forces of dehumanization and violence in whatever form they take.
This deep dive has really given me a lot to think about. Levinas is definitely challenging, even uncomfortable at times, but I can see how powerful these ideas can be.
That's the thing about philosophy, right? It's not about easy answers. It's about making us think harder, encouraging us to live more thoughtfully.
And one thing that really sticks with me is that idea of the face as like the ultimate expression of the other. It really gets to the heart of what he's trying to say about ethical encounters.
It's such a central concept, and it's generated so much discussion and debate. It's not just about physical features. It represents the very essence of the other, their vulnerability, their uniqueness, their infinite worth.
And in that encounter, we're called to respond, to be responsible. It's like we have this duty to care for the other simply because they exist.
Exactly. And that obligation, according to Levinas, it's not optional. It's part of who we are.
Okay, now I see why Levinas is considered so radical. He's not just adding to our existing moral ideas, he's proposing a whole new foundation for ethics, one based on putting the other first.
Exactly. And that has huge implications for how we understand ourselves, our relationships, everything. It asks us to rethink our priorities.
So it's not about being nice or following rules. It's about, I don't know, a transformation, a fundamental shift in how we relate to the other.
You got it. It's about recognizing that ethical demand of the face and responding with empathy, with responsibility, with respect for the others, I guess, otherness.
This is heavy stuff, but it also gives me hope. Hope that we can build a better world, even with all the chaos and suffering we see.
I feel that too. And I think Levinas gives us a way forward. Not a step-by-step guide, but more like a compass.
So we've really gone deep here, explored all these complex ideas, wrestled with some pretty tough critiques. I think one thing's for sure, Levinas doesn't give us easy answers.
No, not at all.
It's more like he's asking us to, I don't know, to completely rethink how we see the world, how we relate to it.
Yeah, he's giving us a whole new perspective.
One where that ethical encounter with the other is at the very center.
Right at the center.
And that encounter, like we talked about, it all comes down to recognizing the face, seeing the other's vulnerability, their uniqueness, just how much they matter. But how do we actually live this philosophy? How do we take these big ideas and, apply them to our everyday lives?
That's the tricky part, right? Bridging that gap between theory and, actually living it. Levinas doesn't give us a set of instructions, but I think there's some key things we can try to, to put into practice.
All right, lay it on us. What are those actionable insights?
Well, remember how Levinas talks about saying versus said?
Yeah, going beyond those fixed categories and labels.
Exactly. So maybe the first step is just to, to really see people, not as objects or obstacles, but as individuals with their own stories, their own experiences.
So being more mindful, more aware of the people around us.
Yes. Cultivating that awareness, that attentiveness to the other. It could be as simple as really listening to someone, not just waiting for your turn to talk. What if, instead of trying to categorize them, you approached each interaction with genuine curiosity,
Mm.
like a willingness to be surprised by who they are?
That's a big shift, for sure. And it takes the pressure off of us needing to have all the answers. It's more about being open to learning from others. Sometimes, maybe the most ethical thing we can do is just be present, listen without judgment.
Absolutely. Real ethical responsibility involves humility,
Yeah.
a willingness to learn from the other. Think about a time when someone truly listened to you, without interrupting, without judging. Didn't it make you feel seen, like truly valued?
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe that's the kind of encounter Levinas is pointing us towards.
And it seems like it's also about resisting that urge to, I don't know, to dominate, like we were talking about with Robinson Crusoe.
Yeah, imposing our will on everyone and everything. It's something we all struggle with. But Levinas wants us to move beyond that need for control, to be more collaborative, more empathetic. Imagine, instead of trying to win an argument, you actually trying to understand where the other person was coming from, even if you disagreed with them.
So letting go of the need to be right all the time, recognizing that the other has value, even if they're different from us.
Exactly. Honoring their otherness. Their perspective might challenge us, but it also has something to teach us.
This is a lot to process, but I can see how powerful it could be. It's definitely a different way of being in the world.
And remember, it's not about being morally perfect. It's a journey. It's about constantly striving to be more present, more responsive to the needs of others.
We're all works in progress, right? Always learning, always growing.
Exactly. And those small acts of kindness, of compassion, they can make a real difference. They have this ripple effect.
Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive into Emmanuel Levinas. We explored some dense ideas, some tough questions. Hopefully, we've given everyone some new ways to think about ethics and responsibility.
Levinas is one of those thinkers who stays with you. He makes you question things, look at your life, your choices in a whole new way.
And if you want to keep exploring, Ethics in Infinity is a great place to start. It's a collection of interviews with Levinas, a little more accessible than some of his other work.
And for those who are ready to go even deeper, Totality and Infinity is his most well-known book. It really gets into all the complexities of the self and the other.
Wherever you decide to start with Levinas, we hope this deep dive has sparked some ideas, maybe even a new perspective on what it means to live ethically, especially in a world that often seems to put self-interest first.
That encounter with the face of the other, it's not a one-time thing. It's a constant process of learning and growing.
So as you go about your day, be present, be open, let yourself be challenged by the other. You might be surprised by what you learn. Until next time, keep diving deep.